Human trafficking is a much bigger issue than most people realize. Today, we're going to be talking with an expert who can shed some light on this global epidemic and provide us hope for better understanding human trafficking, how we can help, and what needs to be done to end human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Today's guest is currently a North American cloud strategist with a background in broadcast journalism and coding and development. She's also an advocate for the complete eradication of human trafficking and sexual exploitation in South Carolina and across the globe. As a constitutional republic preservationist, she believes we, the people, are the solution, and through Christ, we can do all things. Together, we can return our nation to God, and He can heal our land. Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm so glad that you've tuned in for this especially important episode today. This is a discussion that we need to have so that we can increase our understanding of what's going on in the world around us and how we can help. Today, we are going to be talking about hope for ending human trafficking. But I want to start off this episode turning your mind back to scripture, specifically Isaiah 42, verses 6-7, that says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the nations, to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. And that's part of our goal with this episode today. My guest today is Dakota Fitzgerald, who's a constitutional republic preservationist and an advocate for the complete eradication of human trafficking. She has a background in survival training, women's self-defense, broadcast journalism, coding and development, and is currently a North American cloud strategist for a prominent IT company. Her mission is to bring together unique skills and perspectives to grow awareness and address the fastest growing global crime, human trafficking. She works within her local community to shine light on this issue, provide inspiration and hope to others, and to be a voice for the voiceless. Welcome to the program, Dakota.
Wow, Michelle, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm so excited and happy to be here with you today.
You know, we've been trying to do this episode for a long time, but I just really believe that God's timing is perfect. But I'm so grateful to you for the work that you are doing. And I'm grateful for the time that you're willing to give to be on this episode, because I really think this is an area where, if I'm being honest, up until a few years ago, I didn't realize what a big issue this was. And so I'm sure that some of my listeners don't understand either. But what I do know, Dakota, is that so often our ministry comes out of our own hurts and trials. Where did your passion come from for ending human trafficking? And what's your vision and what's your mission?
Yeah, great. So I agree with you completely. This is a widespread issue that not enough people know about, and awareness is where we have to start. So I want to give a huge thank you again to you for allowing me the time to be on the podcast today. Without platforms like these and individuals who are willing to have the conversation on a wider scale, we won't make the impact that we are trying to have, not only in our local communities, but across the globe, right? This is a global issue. So my passion for ending human trafficking really started at a young age. It was something that was prominent in a difficult way, right? And some people have firsthand experiences, and it's one of those issues where you may not know that you're being trafficked, or individuals who have been trafficked in the past don't identify as having been trafficked until they come to light and realize that it's a much wider spread issue and it has many different forms and faces. So as I continue to grow and develop in my life, I had to have a come to Jesus moment, right? And realize that my life is, it's precious like everybody else's, but there has to be a purpose. And I didn't know what that purpose was. So I ended up going backpacking, right? And it's that that age old, go find yourself, asking all of the hard questions at a young age. And I decided to do it in a very unconventional way where I just said, I'm just going to leave and I'm going to go explore and learn how to live off the land and understand the difference between want versus need. And in that journey, I really discovered what I believe I was put here on this earth to do, and that's to stand boldly and strong in the face of adversity and make sure that we are a voice for the voiceless. And in the past couple of years, with the political climate and all of the different things that are happening in the world, human trafficking really kind of came to light. And while it's been an issue that's been ongoing since really the beginning of time, not many people knew how prominent it was. So that's when I really decided to dig in and dedicate my life to the complete eradication of human trafficking. My vision and my mission are big. I want to empower others to embrace their greatness, and I want them to realize that they are not alone, and that regardless of what your journey looks like, you are your expert in your life, and we can all together do great things for humanity. And we don't have to have the division and the strife. We can genuinely come together and make big differences in our world. So that's what I'm here hoping to be able to do. And we'll just have to continue working along that path, right? We'll have to continue fighting together to make sure that that happens.
And that's exactly what we need to do, I think, is link arms and help spread the word and spread the education. So let's start there. Help us understand what exactly constitutes human trafficking, because I think we've all heard the term, but I think for some, there's a tendency to think, oh, well, that happens in other countries, not necessarily. That happens in our community and our neighborhood. So help us understand, what is human trafficking?
Yes, definitely. So there are two different forms of human trafficking. There is labor trafficking and there is sex trafficking. Both of those require force, fraud, or coercion in order to make an individual do something they would otherwise not be willing to do. So with labor trafficking, of course, that is someone being exploited for labor. I focus primarily on the other end of things in the sex trafficking realm, where an individual is either forced, frauded, or coerced into commercial sex acts against their will. And so whenever you dig into sex trafficking, there are actually many different types of sex trafficking. And so we can break that down a little bit deeper and kind of list those out. We have pimp trafficking, peer trafficking, gang trafficking, familial sex trafficking, and then a fifth, which is not nationally recognized, but we see it quite often in the field, is something we call survival sex trafficking. So all of these different forms take on, again, a different base. They have different methods and ways that they are implemented within our local communities. But the more we know about them, the easier we can recognize and the easier we can step in and do something if it's appropriate, right? We never want to put ourselves in harm's way, but we do want to be able to recognize, identify, and help to mitigate these things from happening.
Yeah, I want to be real sensitive about this and not use hurtful terminology, but help us to understand, how does trafficking actually happen? Because the more I've come to understand, the more I know that it's happening right in front of us. It's happening right under our noses. So how does it happen? What
Yeah,
can we be looking for?
definitely. So it really depends on what type of trafficking is taking place.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It happens right here in our backyard. So I'll just give you a couple of stats and then we can talk about how that begins to happen. Number one, sex trafficking is, like you mentioned in the intro, a global crime, and it is the fastest growing crime in the world. The United States, unfortunately, is the number one buyer. So we are, if you're located in the States, and unfortunately, just know that the US is kind of one of those driving factors. It does happen everywhere else in the globe, but unfortunately, that's where we are with the numbers. It's a $90 billion annual revenue stream. So when you think about from a business perspective, this is huge. When we really dig into the different types of trafficking and how it starts to happen, we have to understand that number one, it's ever changing. Just like for me, I come from an IT background, right? So the IT landscape is ever shifting. You have individuals who are moving to the cloud. You have individuals who are just now connecting into devices and using IoT and all these connected digital assets, right? Same thing happens in the trafficking world. And it's unfortunate, but it's business savvy because of the money that is being driven behind this particular issue. And so when you think about a trafficker, you really have to think about a businessman, right? And there are business women as traffickers as well. I don't want to leave that out or paint a negative picture in the sense that it only takes on one face. It doesn't. It could be a whole gamut. But what's important to understand is that when you think about the revenue stream that's flowing, these individuals are going to do whatever they can to continue increasing that revenue stream or maintain that revenue stream. So, for example, let's look at COVID. What happened over the pandemic is everybody went home, right? Kids were now taking online classes, parents maybe were working from home, and there was just a big divide between face-to-face interaction and then with that oversight. So sometimes kids were getting onto online classes, they were getting into the school chat rooms. School chat rooms weren't being looked after the way that they probably should have, didn't have the security set up because it happened so fast and not enough people knew how to secure those online platforms. And they were being left open, which is an open door for people with bad intentions, right? To slip in and start accessing children and beginning that grooming process. So that's really how it starts, is by having a point of vulnerability. And that vulnerability could take on many different faces. And then having an individual attempt to earn trust. The trafficker will groom, which is something we're working on to get nationally recognized because there's not a firm definition, but I'll explain it to you guys if you'd like to go into that. But they do, the traffickers will try to establish trust. They will start grooming. And then after a set amount of time, they will begin trafficking the individual, whether that is through the 4 different methods I mentioned before.
Let's talk a little bit about that grooming. Like, as a parent, my kids are older, but if I still had kiddos in the home, what do I need to know to be looking for in terms of opportunities for grooming to happen?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And for any of the parents or guardians out there, I just want to have a plea or a call to action that we have to be more involved. We have to be present in our children's lives. And you're not going to be considered that hover mother or any of the negative connotation, right, that comes along with just being involved in your child's life and being able to watch or monitor what they are doing online. And that is where these traffickers are really, they're recruiting online first. Really because of the pandemic, it did not hinder or hurt the traffickers. It actually sped up their speed to market. And so when you look at how they adjusted, they are savvy and on the spot. And they said, oh, well, my product is no longer in the field anymore. I don't have to go to a location on site. My product is now online. It's now digital. So let me adjust my business model and let me attack the market where it is. And that means going online to the individual on the other end of the computer screen, on the other end of the cell phone or the chat room, or, you know, the game chats, the Discords, the Minecrafts, you name it, that if there is a bi-directional communication, there is an opportunity. So what we need to understand is that as parents or guardians, being able to ask strategic questions, being able to perk your ears up to conversations that might be off color or out of character for your child to be having, and watching behavioral shifts within your child, again, their communication with either whoever's on the other end of the screen or with friends, just being very aware and cognizant that there are outside influences. One of the most difficult things to come to terms with, I think, especially as we shift into this new digital age, children are amazing at technology. It's like they are born, they come out of the womb and they know how to operate it. It's just so second nature to them. For other generations, some of us might not be as technically savvy. So we have to start understanding what the technology is and how it operates. And therefore, you can start to see where the vulnerabilities are. One of the most difficult things, though, to get across, especially for children, is that the person on the other end of the screen might not be who you think they are, right? We have technology now where you have emojis or you have avatars, and they can look fun and playful and approachable, without you really knowing who's on the other side. And now we can take it as far as CGI, and we have deep fakes, and you look like you're talking to a real living human person, right? And that person looks kind and friendly and they're saying all of the right things. You really never know who's actually on the other side, though. And I don't want to paint a negative or a disheartening picture, but it's just about being vigilant and being aware.
And I think that's the key, is that we have to be aware. Not everybody on the other side of the screen has nefarious intentions, but they do craft their message and their picture and their presentation in a way that draws people in. Perhaps
Mhm.
people who are looking for a relationship, people who are looking to be valued and accepted. Oh, we've got a lot to talk about. Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but I don't want you to go anywhere because this is a really important topic. And if you are a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, this is information you need to be aware of to keep your family safe. We're going to take a real quick break, but when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation with Dakota Fitzgerald on hope for ending human trafficking. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective, where today we're having a really important conversation with Dakota Fitzgerald about hope for ending human trafficking. And before the break, we were talking about what that looks like, what a big industry this is, and how the recent pandemic even facilitated more trafficking rather than preventing it. Dakota, I'm curious, from your information and your research, what are the top 3 states for human trafficking? I know it can happen anywhere and it's a worldwide global epidemic, but how about in the United States? What are the top 3 states where you see it occurring?
You're absolutely right. It can happen anywhere. And honestly, it's really difficult to grab those stats. But we do know from a specificity of geographic areas. We know that coastal areas, so California is a very large coastal state. That is definitely a very prominent area of human trafficking. We're also seeing it increased across border states. So Texas is very big for trafficking simply because of the border and how that geographical area is maintained and managed. And we also see this interstate, right? So we see people moving from state to state in um, very rapid and very kind of dispersed ways. And it's difficult to track and maintain that number because you think about all of the individuals that are being trafficked and how, number one, hard it is to come to terms with the fact that you are being trafficked. But then in addition to that, come out and say, hi, I've been trafficked and here's where I've been. Or even tracking those movements is very difficult. But what I can tell you specifically in one state, in South Carolina, I can tell you the top 3 counties, which is mind blowing. Whenever I talk to people in the state of South Carolina, I often tell them these top 3 counties for human trafficking, and they have no idea that it's happening, much less happening in their backyard. So I'll tell you Horry County, which is Myrtle Beach area, Charleston, again, another coastal county, and then Greenville, South Carolina, which is very close to home for me, right? I'm based in
And
Greenville,
me.
and you as well. So that's when it really becomes real, because you realize, oh, this is in our backyard, and we are in the top 3 in the state. Out of 46 counties, we are in the top 3, and that is very disheartening. But what we can see is, for example, 85. It's our Highway 85, and we're strategically placed between Atlanta and Charlotte, North Carolina. So with Atlanta, Georgia, very big trafficking hotspot. Charlotte, North Carolina, another big trafficking hotspot. Greenville, South Carolina is smack dab in the middle, and we have 85 that connects all 3 points in a line. And so what we see is traffickers moving individuals from hotspot cities through Greenville. So we can definitely pinpoint, and we see the movement. I wish we had more specific numbers to go on, but we can definitely track through the Department of Justice, which has a national human trafficking task force. And then also all local states have human trafficking task forces as well, if their state has set them up. South Carolina has. So that's where we get some of that information from the AG report.
But it makes perfect sense that in large part it's coastal or border states or states that have a hub that leads to other big cities so that traffickers can get their victims and get them out and take them to a new place.
Yes, exactly. And you know what's also right in line with that is where trafficking most often occurs, right? So we need to also understand that while this is happening across the spectrum, it can happen in schools, it happens in churches. We're also seeing hotspots being formed in truck stops, rest areas, gas stations. So when you think about individuals moving from state to state, usually if they're being moved in large quantities, they're going to be moved in the 18-wheeler style or large vans or trucks. Those vans or trucks are going to have to stop at certain places. They're going to have to stop at rest areas or truck stops. They also have individuals moving from place to place within those truck stops. So while our law enforcement does the best that they absolutely can do in trying to mitigate this, like I said, the traffickers are wise, so they end up switching vehicles or switching people to their passing hand, so to speak. So it makes it a lot more difficult to track. But being aware of that and knowing that those truck stops, those rest areas, gas stations, hotels, even restaurants, schools, and churches are hotspots for human trafficking, allows us an area or a venue to really go in and make a stand. And what I mean by that is very small things can make a difference, right? I started something called Post-it notes to end human trafficking. And it's a very simple concept. Anybody can do it. You just grab a stack of sticky notes, you write hashtag end human trafficking, you put the human trafficking hotline and text line number, which I'll give to you guys. And then if you or someone you know needs help, call the number. You are not alone. And you just post the sticky notes wherever you go, whether it's, like I said, inside of a public restroom, post it on the inside of the door in the female restroom. You never know when a trafficking victim has 2 seconds to grab that post-it note, stuff it in their pocket, and pray for an opportunity to call or text the hotline. And that could be their way out. So knowing where the hotspots are give us an opportunity to go out and grow awareness and help the victims that could potentially be passing through.
Now, you mentioned hotspots in terms of physical places that don't change, but are
Yeah.
there hotspots in terms of venues and activities that attract the traffickers that we need to be aware of?
So definitely, and you mentioned a couple of really good points, places that don't change, right? So when you talk about venues, those are hotspots that I mentioned. Another one that I didn't mention, but is definitely on at least in the top 5, are illicit massage venues. So there have been stories that have come out about that, but a lot of times, and certainly not all, but we just have to be aware and vigilant that some of those massage parlors are not what they say they are. So we do need to be aware of that one. Other things, other venues, for example, Super Bowl. I know that a lot of people have thought, no way, that can't possibly be happening. 100% it did, it has, and it is now being stopped. But the Super Bowl or large sporting arenas, those are very prominent for human trafficking because you have so many people, few security members. Once you get inside, you can move people around quite easily without looking suspicious. You can also, you have a big distraction. Everybody's staring at the game. Everybody's staring at the halftime show, right? And they're watching that go on while other things are happening behind the scenes. So there are definitely things like that, whether it's music concerts, festivals, sporting arenas. Those are places that it definitely happens. And again, online. So I mentioned before, chat rooms, whether it is a school organized chat room that gets left open and doesn't have the security it needs, or some of the gaming sites. So Minecraft, Roblox is another big one. Any of these gaming sites where you can go in and create your own world and leave them open to others to come in is a huge vulnerability.
So talk about that. I want you to expand on that for just a second because I know a lot of parents have kiddos that get online and do Minecraft. So how do we go from our kids are playing a game to the next thing you know, they're being lured by a trafficker? Help a
Yeah.
parent understand that who may not be that tech savvy and doesn't understand, it seems like a harmless game. Take us
Right.
through that process.
Sure. Yeah, we'll go through a hypothetical with everybody listening really quick. So imagine that you are a parent or a guardian, and your child is playing Minecraft, and they go in, and it's very fun and it's educational, even, right? I love it. The concept is fantastic. The kids are able to go in and architect their own little worlds. They can build houses, barns, you name it. They can build it in there, and it's great. But what's even better is that they can interact with other children within the game. The problem is we don't know, again, who's on the other end of that screen. So as you have an avatar approach you, you think that that is another kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, same age as your child. Maybe it's a 10, 11, 12-year-old, no problem. They're in there having a good time playing the game. You get a friend request, right? It happens all the time. You're having fun building a house. So-and-so comes over, Johnny Smith is playing and building with me, and he's going to send me a friend request so that we can play again in the future. And that's great because now we're building relationships and we're engaging and we're learning. Fantastic. Problem is, Johnny Smith is not the 12-year-old that you think your child is playing with, right? Johnny Smith is actually a 35-year-old, and that individual likes to prey on children. The thing is, whenever that individual is speaking to your child, you hear them, right? Oh, that didn't sound like a 35-year-old man. I
Right.
completely understand, but they have voice filters. These individuals are very advanced in the way that they groom, and they're invested. When you think about investing in a product, and I hate to put it that way, but we have to get to the point where we recognize what it is. This is a business for the traffickers. And so when you invest in a product, you see the payoff or the return on investment that that product can have. You're willing to invest more time, energy, and effort so that you can increase your speed to market and that you can ultimately increase your payout. So when Johnny Smith puts on that voice filter and now sounds like a 12-year-old and has an avatar that looks like a 12-year-old, and he knows how to act like a 12-year-old because he's attracted to them and he knows what they like, that friend request becomes much more malicious. Now they're going to start building a relationship. This is where we see the grooming aspect begin. This is where we start building trust. Trust is very important in a trafficking situation because once you lose that trust, you can potentially lose your product. Unlike a computer or a physical sale, that person can literally, it has legs. It's not going to grow legs and walk away, right? It has legs. It can walk away and you can lose the investment. So we're going to start that grooming process. And what happens is Johnny Smith starts off like any 12-year-old would. Hey, I love playing the game. What do you like? What do you like to build? Oh, let's build this together, and they're just chatting and you're thinking, you're monitoring the conversation and you see no problems with that. And then a few months down the road, you even become comfortable that Johnny Smith isn't an issue. So I don't really need to monitor that conversation as closely as I would. And as you let your guard down, that trafficker begins to get a little bit more bold. And maybe they just start reaching out at a later time, right? Devices are, if they're always accessible, that can be difficult to track and maintain. If you put like screen limits on, that can improve the situation drastically, because if you recognize Johnny Smith is reaching out at 1 o'clock in the morning and your child is in bed, supposed to be sleeping, right? They don't have access to that device at that time. That's a good way for you to kind of cut things off and start to ask questions. Why is this person reaching out so late? That's strange, unlike a 12-year-old, right? Unfortunately for the kids who don't have the individuals putting screen time limits or have access full time to the devices, they begin having advanced conversations where it might be, I really have liked getting to know you. Would you mind sending me a picture so I know what you look like in real life? Here's a picture of me. Meanwhile, it's just a photoshopped image or something they pulled off of Google of some 12-year-old boy, right? So that starts to grow. Eventually it can turn into asking your child to do a task or something, an act that they wouldn't normally do. Maybe it's sending a picture of something that's inappropriate. Maybe it's saying something inappropriate. It starts very small, but it begins to build and build and build. That's when we see those character changes. That's when we need to step in and say, hey, what's going on? Let's have a conversation. How's your friend from Minecraft, right? What do you guys talk about? What's going on? and you start to see that increase or that elevation. So we want to just be vigilant of the process. Ultimately, in the worst case scenario, it becomes, hey, I actually live near you. Because we've already exchanged that we live in this city or this town, this state. It would be really cool to hang out in real life, right? We always play on Minecraft, but why don't we just go to this park down the street? You set up a play date. Individuals get a little, they get a bit more brazen, and they just decide to meet face to face, and then that interaction escalates even further. So we can see that slow progression. It does take months, sometimes years, to get to that point where a trafficker decides now is the time that I can now traffic confidently. But that child has invested a lot of trust and faith in the individual. So all in all, that's a quick way of describing it, a quick hypothetical, but it is important to understand that it does take time, and we have to be vigilant months into the process of determining whether this individual is who they say they are, especially when we cannot see or hear the real person.
What are some of the common myths about human trafficking?
There are a lot. One is that it doesn't happen to men. Human trafficking happens to men a lot more often than you could imagine. It's just that, unfortunately, men do not feel as comfortable with coming forward. They feel as though it somehow, which I completely understand, our society has built up this mentality around what a strong man looks like. And so, unfortunately, sometimes they do feel as though they can't come forward and be confident in saying, I was trafficked, right? So, myth number one is that it doesn't happen to men. Another myth is that all traffickers are men. Again, not the case. A lot of traffickers are women. We see an increase just recently in female traffickers trafficking young boys. We know national cases, and so we can point to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine was an individual who may not have been presented in the media as a front runner, but was certainly a very big player in that case. And so there is a prominent female trafficking, not only young women, but also young boys that simply maybe haven't come to light yet. So those are two major ones. Another big myth is that trafficking happens either in a far off land, not in our backyard. I think we've touched on that. It's certainly happening everywhere. And the fact that trafficking will happen from like a Walmart parking lot, right? That you're just going to get kidnapped from a parking lot, and that's going to be the end of things, or that it's very much like the movie Taken, where someone is physically taken from a location. A lot of times, trafficking again can happen online, and here lately, especially again in this digital age, trafficking is much more a bondage of the mind than it is a bondage of the body. So while certainly people have been in circumstances, and I'm sure are still in circumstances of physical bondage, we have to look beyond that to realize that a lot of it is much more mental now. And so what can we do to help the individual who either doesn't recognize that they're being trafficked, or is being trafficked but feels stuck mentally?
Now, you've mentioned that several times throughout this interview, that individuals may not even recognize that they've been trafficked. So can you speak to how we can help them understand that that has in fact happened?
Yeah, this really kind of gets back to those four different types of human trafficking, or sex trafficking in particular. So let's think about peer trafficking, right? So peer trafficking is when a friend is the trafficker, and this could look like a young girl in high school who has a friend who has been working as a model, and she comes to the friend and says, I have a great job. I would love for you to work it with me. And I think it would be really fun. It's been fun for me. I've made some good cash. Why don't you come and do this modeling gig? And friend says, oh, okay, I've never thought about it, but if you say it's good and I trust you, you're my best friend, let's go do it. And so they do. And when they arrive, everything's kosher. Everything is totally fine. It's just a very clean, not an appropriate model shot or a gig, and everything goes off without a hitch, and they leave and they get paid and totally fine. Friend says, hey, we can do it again next weekend if you're interested. They go back. And again, we see that slow progression where now they're asking you to just have a bra on, right? And you're a little uncomfortable with that, but maybe just this one time it'll be fine. Then the next time it's a little bit more crude and it just continues to increase until before you know it, you're shooting pornography and you didn't see that progression happening. In the moment, you felt like you were trusting a friend that you've known forever and you were just pushing the boundary a little bit. And now that you've done it, it's really not that bad. And maybe I could do this full time, right? And then from there it progresses into your photographer needing you to do favors for friends. And you see again that slow progression where you just slowly get pulled in and that trust factor is there and that bond is there. And it becomes very difficult for you to recognize that you're even in the situation of doing something or being asked to do something against your will or being coerced or frauded or forced into what we consider sex trafficking, right? It is a recognized form of trafficking. And so as the victim, sometimes you just don't realize that you're in it, you know? Same thing with familial sex trafficking, where a family member is a trafficker. This one's very difficult to talk about. South Carolina is #1 in the nation for familial sex trafficking. And it's just one of those that you can't possibly fathom how a family member could do that to another individual. But what happens there is Stockholm syndrome really takes hold. And so Stockholm syndrome is where your victim becomes in love with the trafficker, right? They have formed such a deep bond and trust with that trafficker that they consider them to be a loved one. So when you have a young boy whose mom is trafficking him, he looks to the mom and says, well, I love her. That's my mom. Well, mom starts to display acts of love in ways that we know to be uncomfortable and inappropriate. Little boy doesn't realize that there's anything wrong with that because this is mom and I trust mom, right? And then as that little boy grows up and she continues to exploit him, he cannot reconcile that mom makes me feel bad, but mom is a trusted, loving figure. And she has taught me how to love, but in a different way than maybe other people know how to love, right? And so that individual, that young boy, may take years to recognize. He may never recognize that he was trafficked as a child, sexually exploited. But if she then started to expose him to friends, then he would have been trafficked, right? So it's very difficult for individuals maybe who have been in that situation to even realize or to break that Stockholm syndrome and understand, number one, yes, I have been trafficked, but then how do I deal with that? You know, what's the recovery process like?
Right.
So it's a very long and drawn out, not only the trafficking process, the grooming process, but the recovery process is very long and drawn out, but it is possible. And I've seen many people recover and come back 10 times stronger than they ever were before.
I not only want to talk about today how to identify this and become more aware of it in our own communities, but what can we do in our local communities to make a difference? What can I do to end trafficking?
So we talked a little bit about how to recognize it, right? It's about behavioral changes. It's about being aware of your surroundings. And so you mentioned that I do women's self-defense and survival training. This is really key. Even if you're not a survivalist or if you've never been out in the woods, you know, by yourself trying to just live, if you've never done a women's self-defense course, that is a-okay. You have everything you need right within you. God has given you the gifts that you need to be aware and to have discernment. And so when you are in an area, regardless of where you are, you're in a parking lot, right? Hypothetically, you need to have situational awareness. So whether that is taking small steps to make yourself and those around you safer, for example, parking under a streetlight, parking closer to the door, making sure you have your keys in your hands, don't be on the cell phone when you're walking in or walking out of the building. All of these little things, making sure you're looking around. Let's have our head on a swivel and know who is around you. And I do something that's called a 5, 10, 15 scan. So what I do is when I get out of a vehicle, Well, really before I even put the car in park, I'm already looking around to make sure I am aware of my surroundings. But once you get out, do a quick scan around you, a 360, looking just at 5 yards away from you. Is there anybody within your 5 yard bubble? That's something you want to be aware of, right? Yes, there is that man carrying his groceries to his car, didn't even make eye contact with me. That's normal, right? Not everybody is a threat to you, and we need to just be aware and vigilant, but we don't have to be paranoid. But then you do another 10 yard scan and just look around and make sure that you understand what is happening. Okay, there is a man and a wife and their child, and they're walking to the car. They have a cart. Everything looks fine, normal there. Let's continue doing that while we're in the store and as we come back out. That should become a common practice, second nature for you anywhere you go. Head on a swivel, doing the scans, making sure everything's fine. Another step beyond that is when you recognize that something might be a little off. Number one, you feel it in your gut, right? So we have ears to hear and eyes to see. When you see something that you know just to be not right, you're going to feel it first. And then you might have that rationale process that comes into play where you're like, oh, it's probably nothing, it's probably fine. But have you ever had that incident where you're like, oh man, that's really nagging on me. I really should have probably investigated that a little bit more or been a little bit more aware or alert to what was happening. And it just stays with you all day. And you can't stop thinking, what if? Don't have a what if situation. If you feel like something is not right, maybe just take a minute. Don't run in there guns ablazing. You don't need to be the hero for anybody, but you do need to keep yourself safe, and you just need to take a moment to look around and be aware. So looking into the situation more, just with your eyes, use your senses. Is everything okay in that scenario over there away from me? For example, a man is walking out with a child. That young child is a girl. She is screaming, crying, kicking. He is being forceful, taking her away from the building. Well, is that just an upset child, or is that something nefarious, right? We're, as parents, we know our kids have breakdowns in the middle of Walmart, and sometimes we just need to hurry them onto the car so we can stop making a scene everywhere. And sometimes it doesn't look very pretty and calm, right? But we need to understand, is that something really bad happening, or is that just a parent having a tough day and the kid is having a meltdown? So ways that you can identify that is look at the hand placement, right? You know how you would grab your child to lead them out of a store if they were having a meltdown. You know how you would pick a child up. Traffickers or individuals who have nefarious intentions aren't going to have the same level of love and care that you would as a parent, right? So look at the hand placements, look at the verbal engagement that's taking place. Whether that child is saying, dad, stop, right? Dad, stop, I don't want to go to the car, I want that toy. Oh, okay, well, that kid's just having a meltdown. We can move on with our day and just pray for them, because you know the car ride home is going to be a little hectic. But if that child is not saying, dad, stop, little things like that you need to be aware of, and just take some time to listen. Now, once we see, and let's say hypothetically, and I hope that nobody ever identifies and or experiences, watches, observes something happening that they consider to be bad, right? This is all situational, and people need to be prepared, and they have to know how to handle themselves if something were to occur. I cannot give you the 1, 2, 3s or the ABCs of what to do in any situation or circumstance, because everything is going to be different. Where you are positioned and who is around, it's all going to change. But the first thing that I want to make sure people are aware of is that, again, you need to make sure that you are safe. If you're not safe, you can't help anybody. If you get drawn into a situation that puts you and other people in danger, you didn't do any bit of good that day. You actually made the situation worse. So keep yourself safe, whether that's staying at a safe distance and making a phone call, right? Let's go ahead and call the cops. It could be nothing. There's a non-emergency line for a reason, right? Hey, I'm just observing this. I have no idea if this is what I think it to be, but here are the reasons why I feel bad about the situation. I have a gut feeling the child is not identifying the person as a parental figure. The parental or the individual taking the child from this location does not seem to be a loving, caring, compassionate individual, doesn't seem to be identified by the child. This is what they are wearing, so make sure you get descriptions and identifications. He put child into the car, not in a car seat. not in the back seat with a seatbelt on, all the things you would do as a parent, right? Maybe in the front seat, slam the door, whatever it is, keep an eye out for those things. Get the license plate. Make sure you have that license plate number. That is huge. Other things that can happen, maybe there's security guards around. Maybe you're inside the store. Just walk over to a security guard. Hey, not sure what's going on here. Maybe you want to keep an eye on it. Just throwing it out there. It's not my job, but I'm going to go ahead and let you know that I feel uncomfortable about that situation happening right there. Another thing, depending again on where you are and what the situation is, if this is not going to put you in danger and you feel comfortable and confident in doing this, you have to make sure, again, it's not putting you in danger. I cannot reiterate that enough. But if you feel comfortable, if you're in a very well-lit area, you're inside the store, there are plenty of people around, a lot of witnesses, you can always just walk up, child is not having a good time, individual carrying, pulling, dragging child, whatever, that person needs to be addressed. So why not just walk up to the child and say, hey, honey, I know you're having a bad day. I have a sucker. Or, hey, oh, did you see that toy over there? Wasn't that cool? Give a distraction, right? That individual then is going to be able to, they're number one, going to recognize that, oh, I've just been noticed. I've made too much of a scene here, and will either abandon what's happening or can identify themselves positively as that child's parental figure. So some sort of distraction, some sort of insertion, certainly not a, hey, I'm here to the rescue, I'm going to put hands on, or I'm going to save this child, because you never know what's going on. But there are just so many different ways to get involved. Other ways that is much more hands off, right? That's kind of in the field. If you see it happening, like I said, I hope that never happens, that people don't find themselves in those situations, but that's not anything we can ask for, right? Those are kind of things that happen a spur of the moment, and you're in that place in that time for a reason. Ways to be involved that are much less hands-on. Get involved in local nonprofits, right? There are probably nonprofits around you that focus on anti-trafficking, making sure that you are spreading the word. So even just sharing this podcast or going out and saying, hey, did you know about, right? There are great resources for you to check out, whether it's videos online. Rebecca Bender is a great resource. There's a book called Men Fight for Me. All of these things are great ways to learn more, and then you can start spreading the word as well. And that makes more of an impact than you could possibly imagine.
And are there resources that you have or ways that they can support you in your efforts?
It's all about getting out there and being involved. That is the biggest thing that I advocate for, apart from ending human trafficking, is that we all have a part to play. We all have a role here on earth. It's about discovering your purpose. And this might not be yours, right? It might not be your purpose to go out and end human trafficking, but your purpose is within you. It was encoded within you from the moment you were born, before that even, right? God knew you before, when you were in the womb. So you had a purpose. You were made for a reason, and you were here for a reason. And so helping people to embrace that greatness that's within them already, and to recognize that they are worthy, that they are strong and beautiful, and that they can persist through anything. That's what I care about. And so if you're passionate about this topic, I'm happy to connect. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. There are plenty of other ways that we can get in touch with one another, but more importantly than that is you just make sure you find your purpose and that you embrace it fully, and that you believe in yourself to go forth and be bold and make great things happen.
And as Dakota said, this may not be your central focus. This may not be the call that God has on your life, but it is still incumbent upon us to be aware and to keep our eyes open, because it is happening in front of us. It is happening in our neighborhoods and our community. And so we can't just put the blinders on and say it doesn't happen around me, because it is happening around you.
Yeah.
Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, and then we're going to wrap up this episode by talking to Dakota about her hope-filled perspective for you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective, where today we've been having a very enlightening and educational and important conversation about hope for ending human trafficking. Dakota, if a listener is listening to our conversation and they realize that they have been trafficked, what hope-filled perspective do you want to leave with them?
I love this question, and I will do my best to keep it concise without getting emotional. But I do have to say that for anybody listening, if you yourself, someone you know even has experienced human trafficking, if it's just been sexual exploitation and it's taken you a while to realize that that's what it was, or if you know that you were used in a way to pleasure others against your will, and that you were forced, frauded, or coerced, that you didn't realize what was happening in that moment, but that now looking back and coming to terms that that is what has happened. I want you to know that number one, you are not alone. And I want you to know that while what has happened to you seems dark and empty, and that nobody can possibly understand where you are or where you have been, that in order to recognize and appreciate the light, sometimes we have to travel through the darkest of spaces. And God has put you here for a reason and has put this path before you in order to show you that you are strong and you are worthy and you are persistent and you can persevere through anything. So know that you are not alone. Please know that there are plenty of individuals, places that are willing to extend open arms to you and help. And I use help because I know it can be difficult, right? To even understand or think about how can someone possibly help me through this. First and foremost, you are helping yourself by even opening your mind and your ears and your heart to the idea of others being able to come in and help and come alongside you. So people who are willing to just be friends and to just listen and know that I am one. And so if anybody here is listening, feels the need or feels the call to reach out and connect with me, you can absolutely do that. And I will be a lifelong friend and will help you learn to love yourself again and learn to love others the way God intended, not the way that maybe you were first exposed. So with that, I would love to leave a couple of phone numbers. The Human Trafficking Hotline that anybody can reach out to if you just have questions, if you have concerns, if you want to learn more, or if you need to make a report, you can reach out to the Human Trafficking Hotline. That is 1-888-373-7888. Again, that number 1-888-373-7888. And that is the Human Trafficking Hotline, open 24/7. Anytime you need to make a phone call, you can absolutely do that, and they'll be there to answer and start helping. Again, whether that is someone who is being trafficked, who thinks they may have been trafficked, or others who think that trafficking is taking place somewhere around them. In addition to that number that you can call, there is a text line. This is really important, especially if you're doing the post-it notes in your local community. Make sure you put the text line on there. It's a lot more discreet to send a text message than it is to make a phone call for someone who is potentially being trafficked. So that text line is 233-733. You simply send the text "be free." All right, that's BEFREE to that phone number, and you will get a response from an individual representative working the text line. So I hope that is helpful. You guys make sure to jot those numbers down, remember them, put them in your phone so that if you ever need them, hope you don't, but if you ever do, they are there for you. And people are there ready to reach out, open arms, and embrace you going forward.
And friends, we will put both that phone number and that text line in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com, because we want you to have the resources available so that you're on the ready should you need them. As Dakota said, we hope that you don't. But as we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, this is a global epidemic and it's happening in our neighborhoods, in our communities. So we will put those resources in the show notes at drmichelleb.com. Dakota, thank you Thank you so much for coming on and educating us, giving us resources, giving us things to be aware of so that we can together come together and end human trafficking.
Yes,
Friends,
thank
this has
you.
been another episode of your hope-filled perspective. I know that this was on the heavy side, but it's so important. There are people around us who need our help and need us to be aware and to take action. Until we meet again next week, it's my prayer that you will have a hope-filled week.